The night my son screamed was the first night I truly breathed again. His voice tore through the quiet like a blade slicing into the walls, sharp and frantic, carrying through every open window of the old house. The neighbors' dogs began barking in a wild chorus. Porch lights flicked on up and down the street, and somewhere in the distance, I heard old Mr. Henley's gate creak open. Yet I didn't move. I stayed in my rocking chair on the porch, wrapped in the wool shawl my mother had knitted 40 years ago, eyes tilted toward the bruised velvet sky. The stars looked cold that night, mercilessly bright. 1, 2, 3. I tried counting them until his second scream broke the rhythm. I smiled, slow and quiet, because someone was finally screaming because of me. You might think that sounds cruel. What kind of mother smiles when her own child screams like an animal trapped in a cage? What kind of woman sits calmly while chaos shatters the air inside her home? I'll tell you. A woman who has been broken for months, who's been treated like a ghost in her own house. A woman whose voice was stolen by her own blood. The story I'm about to tell you, my story, didn't begin with that scream. It began 3 months earlier, on the day I buried my husband. But before I take you there, before I peel back those days of silence and humiliation, I need to ask you something. If you've ever been overlooked, silenced, or made to feel small, stay with me. Like, comment, or share your own story when you finish, because every woman who's been told to be quiet deserves to be heard. Now, let's go back to the day I lost everything, and the day I unknowingly gave it all away again. It was a Thursday morning in July, heavy and gray, when we lowered Thomas's coffin into the ground. The air smelled like wet soil and lilies. I wore a black dress I'd bought 2 days before plain, a size too big. In 43 years of marriage, I had never needed mourning clothes. People whispered the usual phrases. He's in a better place. Stay strong, Helen. But I wasn't sure what better place meant anymore. Half of me wept for all the breakfasts we'd never share again, the quiet evenings spent watching the news together, the faint scent of his cologne still clinging to his pillow. But the other half, one I was ashamed of, felt something else. Relief. Thomas was a decent man. Reliable, loyal, and endlessly frugal. But he had ruled our home like a kind warden. Every paycheck I earned as a literature teacher went into his account. He'd hand me cash each month for groceries and a few personal things, as if I were one of his dependents, not his wife. Whenever I wanted a new dress or a small indulgence, a lavender-scented soap, a lipstick from the pharmacy, he would frown. Do you really need it, Helen? For years, I told myself it was just prudence, not control. But after 40 years of saving for the future, I realized the future never arrived. When the doctor said the heart attack had been quick, painless, without a goodbye, I stood in the kitchen and stared at the pliers he'd dropped beside the half-mended fence. For the first time in decades, I didn't know what to do with my hands. 2 weeks later, the lawyer handling Thomas's estate, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Carver, called me to her office. I sat stiffly across from her mahogany desk as she opened a manila folder. Mrs. Moore, your husband left everything in your name, she said. The house, his savings, his retirement funds, approximately $150,000 in total. I blinked at her. All? Mine? She nodded, sliding the will across the table. Completely yours. And, Mrs. Moore, he made one more note. She pointed to a handwritten paragraph at the bottom of the document. If your son Nathan ever attempts to claim these assets, the estate will automatically revert to charity. I felt a chill crawl through my chest. He knew. Linda closed the folder gently. Your husband wanted to make sure you were protected. I walked out of that office trembling. The sunlight outside felt too bright, almost unreal. I drove home with the window down, the wind tangling my gray hair, and for the first time in my life, I whispered aloud, I'm free. Freedom, though it's a fragile thing. You don't realize how easily it can be stolen until someone close to you reaches out with smiling hands. That afternoon, I stood in the living room, staring at the beige sofa Thomas had chosen 20 years ago. The lace curtains yellowed with time, the faint hum of the old refrigerator. I thought of repainting the walls, of taking a trip to Maine, of buying that sky blue couch I'd seen in the furniture shop window. For the first time in decades, the house didn't feel like a cage. Then the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my son standing there, Nathan, with 2 suitcases, a backpack, and that crooked grin he wore whenever he wanted something. Hey, Mom, he said, stepping inside before I could answer. "Hope you don't mind. I'll crash here for a bit. We need to talk." And just like that, Hel walked into my house carrying luggage. Nathan hadn't visited in almost a year. He looked tired but unbothered, shirt untucked, sneakers muddy, eyes darting past me to scan the room. "Nice to see the old place still standing," he muttered, dropping his bags with a thud. My mouth opened, but no words came. He didn't hug me, didn't ask how I'd been, just went straight to the fridge, opened it, and pulled out a beer Thomas had left behind. He took a long sip and said, "So, we need to talk about what happens now that Dad's gone." My hands tightened on the edge of the counter. "What happens?" I echoed softly. He smiled then, a slow, familiar, terrible smile. "Yeah, you're not getting any younger, Mom. It's time we make some plans." I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment the ground beneath my life began to crack. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen tiles, catching on the porcelain teapot Thomas had bought me for our 15th anniversary. The house still smelled faintly of him aftershave, old wood, and the stubborn trace of tobacco he never quite gave up. Nathan was already awake, sitting at the table in his boxers, scrolling through his phone like he owned the place. "Morning," I said softly. He didn't look up. "We need to talk, Mom. About the house, your bills, all that." The tone was off flat, businesslike. He might as well have been an insurance adjuster. "I can manage, Nathan. I've been paying bills for months now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He chuckled, still tapping at his phone. "Sure, but things get complicated when you're older. You could forget something, mess up a payment. I'm just saying it'd be easier if I helped." The words, "when you're older," slid under my skin like a splinter. He finally looked up, eyes bloodshot from another late night. "You should relax. Let me take care of things. I've got time right now." Time. That was what he always had: time to drift, time to make excuses, time to live on someone else's dime. Over the next few days, he unpacked as if he'd never planned to leave. His old band posters went back on the wall of his childhood room. His sneakers cluttered the hallway. Empty soda cans lined the counter like tiny monuments to carelessness. At first, I was almost grateful for the company. The silence after Thomas's death had been unbearable. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like loneliness itself. When Nathan played music too loud or left the bathroom light on, I told myself it was comforting noise. But comfort decays quickly when it's built on disrespect. By the end of the week, my grocery list had doubled, and the refrigerator emptied twice as fast. When I mentioned it, he laughed. "You eat like a bird, Mom. It's not my fault the fridge was already sad before I got here." He drank the last of my coffee and left the pot empty. He left damp towels on the couch, greasy dishes in the sink. Still, I said nothing. Mothers forgive, mothers endure. A few nights later, I woke to the sound of clinking glass. In the hallway, moonlight pooled like silver milk across the floor. Nathan stood in the living room, the liquor cabinet open, pouring whiskey into one of Thomas's crystal tumblers. I leaned on the doorway. "You shouldn't be drinking that. It's your father's." He looked over his shoulder and grinned. "Was? Mom, was my father's. You should get used to the past tense." I almost said something sharp, but the words withered in my throat. In the days that followed, his presence expanded, his voice louder, his demands more frequent. "Can you spot me a few hundred? My car needs work. Then, I'll pay you back once the job comes through." There was always a job coming. Always a promise waiting to be broken. I found myself rearranging my mornings to avoid him. When I heard him moving around upstairs, I'd linger in the garden, pruning flowers that didn't need pruning. Anything to delay walking back into my own house. Miriam called one afternoon. "Helen, how are you holding up?" I hesitated, eyes on the window where Nathan's car was parked crookedly in the drive. "Fine. He's staying for a little while, just until he finds work." Her silence was heavy on the line. Then, softly, "Men in their late 30s rarely find themselves in their mother's guest room. Sweetheart, be careful." "I know what I'm doing," I said, though my voice didn't sound like mine. That evening, as I folded laundry, I found one of Thomas's old shirts in the pile-faded blue cotton, soft from years of washing. I pressed it to my face. For a moment, I almost believed he could still walk through the door, frown at the noise, tell Nathan to respect his mother. But ghosts don't fight your battles. They just watch, silent and useless, from wherever they go. 2 weeks passed. Then one morning, Nathan appeared in the kitchen wearing a collared shirt I hadn't seen before. "Interview today," he said proudly, as though he'd already won. I smiled, genuinely relieved. "That's wonderful." He returned an hour later, still in that same shirt, without a hint of success on his face. "Wasn't a good fit," he muttered, opening the fridge again. "They wanted warehouse work. Not for me." I didn't ask what for me meant. That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, the tick of the old clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator. I thought about the will tucked safely in the desk drawer upstairs, the one that said everything was mine. For the first time, that didn't feel like protection. It felt like bait. Nathan was my only son, my only family. And yet, when I thought of the future, it wasn't his face that comforted me. It was the house, the walls, the porch, the shawl, things that couldn't betray me. The next morning, as I poured myself coffee, Nathan walked in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mom," he said casually, "how much do you have in your savings again?" My hand froze midair. "Why?" He shrugged. "Just wondering. You never know when something might happen. You should really let me handle your finances." I laughed softly, but the sound came out brittle. "I'm fine, Nathan." He leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of beer. "Sure, Mom. For now." That was the first time I realized I was afraid of my own child. Fear is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps in quietly between coffee cups and unspoken words until one day you realize it's everywhere, woven into the air you breathe. By the end of that month, my house no longer felt like mine. Nathan had taken over every corner of it. His sneakers littered the hallway, his gaming headset lay across the living room couch, and his half-finished plates sat like accusations on the counter. "Mom, the Wi-Fi's too slow," he'd complain, tapping his phone. "Upgrade it. I'll help pay once I get a job." He never did. At first, I told myself he was adjusting, that losing another relationship, Jessica, or was it Amanda this time, had shaken him. He was my son, after all, the boy I'd raised, the one who used to bring me daisies from the yard. How could I stop seeing him through that lens? But the man who moved through my home wasn't that boy. He was harder now, colder. One afternoon, as I was watering the potted fern by the window, I heard faint laughter from the living room. I peeked in and froze. Nathan sat at the computer, surrounded by boxes from the attic, Thomas's old coin collection, the silver-plated bookends from our wedding, even my mother's antique brooch. "What are you doing?" I asked. He glanced back, smiling. "Just listing a few things online. You don't need all this old stuff cluttering up the place. Might as well make some money off it." "My things," I said quietly. "Technically our family's things," he corrected, turning back to the screen. For a moment, I saw Thomas in him, not his face, but that same air of quiet authority, the assumption that he always knew best. Only this time, it came with a hint of greed. I wanted to stop him, to tell him to put it all back. Instead, I just stood there, paralyzed by that familiar guilt. Mothers don't confront their sons over things that can be replaced, I told myself. But when I passed by the desk later that night, the empty space where my mother's brooch had been felt like a hole in the room. The weeks blurred into a fog of small humiliations. Nathan borrowed cash for gas. He forgot to pay for groceries. He rolled his eyes whenever I asked him to pick up after himself. When I tried to talk about finding work, he'd scoff. "They're all scams, Mom. They expect you to work for peanuts." I'm better than that. I didn't recognize him anymore. One evening, my neighbor, Mrs. Harris, leaned over the fence while I was trimming roses. "Helen, dear, is Nathan living with you now?" "Yes," I said, trying to sound cheerful, "just until he finds his footing." She frowned, her gray curls bouncing as she shook her head. "Men like that don't find footing, sweetheart. They dig holes for others to fall into." Her words stung, mostly because they rang true. That night, Nathan came home late, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. "You still up?" he called. I was sitting in my chair, pretending to read. "I couldn't sleep," I said. He dropped onto the couch, kicking off his shoes. "You shouldn't stay up so late. Not good for your blood pressure." I glanced at him. "I'm fine." "You've been forgetting things lately," he continued. "You left the stove on last week." "No, I didn't," I said quickly. heat rising in my chest. He smirked. You sure? Maybe you just don't remember. The words landed like a slap. That small, measured tone, the one that sounds like concern but drips with control, was the same voice Thomas had used when he wanted to win an argument without raising his voice. My throat tightened. Good night, Nathan. Just trying to help, he said, turning on the TV. I went to my room and locked the door for the first time in my life. My hands shook as I slid the bolt into place. A few days later, he came home with papers in his hand. Mom, he said, setting them on the kitchen table, I've been thinking. You shouldn't have to worry about money. It's stressful. Why don't we consolidate your accounts? I'll handle everything. You'll just have one card, and I'll take care of bills and groceries. I stared at the neat stack of forms. What kind of paperwork is this? Just a power of attorney, he said easily. So I can help. You know I'd never let anything happen to you. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tear the pages apart. But he leaned forward, his expression softening just enough to twist the knife. Come on, Mom. You trust me, don't you? And I, like every fool who mistakes guilt for love, nodded. We went to the bank the next morning. The branch manager smiled politely. This will allow your son to handle all your transactions, Mrs. Moore. The pen felt heavy in my hand. My name looked wrong on the paper, like it belonged to someone weaker than me. When we walked out into the heat, Nathan was grinning. There, he said. Now, you can relax. I'll handle everything. But I couldn't relax. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something invisible shift inside me, a thread snapping quietly in the dark. The next morning, I woke to silence. The kind that doesn't feel peaceful, only hollow. Nathan's door was open. His shoes were gone. The old sedan was missing from the driveway. For one hopeful moment, I thought he'd finally left. But when I reached the kitchen, the truth hit like cold air. On the counter sat a neat stack of receipts, an envelope marked utilities, and a sticky note. Paid your bills. Took care of groceries. Don't worry about the account, it's all organized now. Love you, Mom. Love you. That word looked foreign written in his hand. I made coffee, though the smell turned my stomach. When I opened the fridge, I noticed all the brand-name groceries had been replaced with cheaper substitutes. Store-brand bread, thinly sliced ham, watered-down milk, Nathan's version of saving. He returned that afternoon, breezy and cheerful, carrying bags of discount detergent and instant noodles. Got a deal on everything, he said, unloading the counter. You'll thank me later. The following week, the control began in small doses. Mom, leave the bills to me. Don't waste electricity keeping the light on. You shouldn't be driving anymore. Too risky. Each sentence was soft, reasonable, and each one took a tiny piece of my independence. When my pension arrived, he deposited it directly into his account, explaining that it was for convenience. I felt my heart thud in my chest. Nathan, that's my money. He sighed, like a man too patient for his own good. Our money, Mom. You don't need to worry about it. You're retired. I'm taking care of things. Our money. Those two words left me dizzy. Within a month, the house no longer obeyed me. He changed the Wi-Fi password. You spend too much time online, Mom. He moved the furniture to maximize space. He bought curtains I didn't choose, unplugged the kettle, locked away the checkbook. Every evening, he handed me an envelope with $400 inside. Your allowance? He'd say casually, as if he were doing me a kindness. I used to teach literature to teenagers who tested boundaries daily. I'd scolded them with kindness, always believing in second chances. But now, looking at my grown son, I wondered if I'd taught the wrong lesson, that forgiveness was endless. One night, I stood outside his bedroom door, listening. Through the thin wood, I heard the sound of typing, muted laughter, and then numbers. Bank numbers. My numbers. I stepped back, heart hammering. I wanted to confront him right then, but fear, stubborn, choking fear, held me still. When Thomas controlled the money, at least it came with protection, a kind of partnership I didn't question. But this was parasitic. Nathan's care was a noose, and I had tied it myself. Days blurred into each other. I lived in loops, cleaning, cooking, pretending not to notice how my freedom had shrunk to the size of a kitchen table. Miriam called often, but I stopped answering. You need rest, Nathan would say, taking the phone from my hand. Don't let people tire you. Once, when I tried to step outside to visit her, he blocked the doorway. "The sun's too harsh today. You'll get dizzy." It was August in Savannah, yes, but the dizziness wasn't from the heat. It was from being caged. At night, I'd sit by the window, looking at the porch where I used to drink tea with Thomas. Fireflies blinked across the yard like tiny warning lights. I whispered into the dark, "What have I done?" The breaking point came quietly. I'd cooked dinner, rice, green beans, and a small portion of chicken thighs. When Nathan sat down, he prodded the food with his fork. "Dry," he said flatly. "I seasoned it the same way I always do." He pushed his plate away. "You never listen. I told you to buy better meat." Something snapped then, a thin thread inside me pulling tight. "I bought what we could afford," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He scoffed. "We? I'm managing the finances. You don't understand what things cost." "I understand more than you think." His eyes lifted slowly, sharp as glass. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing." I stood, collecting plates that hadn't been touched. "Eat or don't. I don't care anymore." He laughed, mocking, humorless. "You sound just like Dad. You know that? Controlling, dramatic." And then he added softly, almost to himself, "Maybe that's why he never really trusted you with money." That one sentence cut deeper than any insult. When he left the table, I stayed behind, staring at the untouched food. The rice had gone cold. The clock ticked loud and cruel on the wall. I gathered my things and walked to my room, locking the door behind me. For the first time, I thought about something dangerous. Not escape, not surrender, but resistance. Because maybe, just maybe, the only way to survive was to stop being afraid of being alone. I didn't sleep that night. The house seemed to breathe around me, walls expanding and contracting with every anxious thought. At dawn, I went to the porch, still in my nightgown, coffee cooling in my hand. The street was silent except for the cicadas starting their endless chorus. I stared at the horizon and realized something I hadn't allowed myself to say out loud. I wasn't living anymore. I was waiting for permission to exist from a son who no longer saw me as human. That morning, Nathan was humming when he came downstairs, scrolling through his phone. "Morning, Mom," he said lightly. "I need you to sign this transfer slip. The utility company changed something with the billing system." I didn't take the paper. "Why are the bills in your name?" He sighed as if exhausted by my stupidity. "Because it's simpler that way. They send me notifications. I keep track. You don't have to worry." "I want to worry," I said softly. He looked up, eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just that I'd like to see the bills myself." He set the paper down on the table a little too hard. "Mom, you're acting paranoid." "Maybe," I said, meeting his gaze for the first time in weeks. "Or maybe I'm finally paying attention." He laughed, but it wasn't amusement. It was a sound meant to belittle. "Fine, you want to handle things? Go ahead." He threw the paper toward me. "But don't come crying when you mess it up." He left for the day, muttering about how ungrateful I'd become. The moment the door shut, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. That afternoon, I decided to clean Nathan's room, my room once, long ago. It was my excuse to enter his territory without suspicion. Dust coated the old bookshelf, but the clutter was newer. Bank envelopes, fast food wrappers, a gaming controller tangled in cords. I lifted a folder from the desk and froze. It was labeled Rose Street Development. Inside, glossy papers displayed floor plans of a luxury condo in downtown Savannah, hardwood flooring, marble counters, panoramic windows. My eyes dropped to the payment details. Deposit, $64,500. Source, More Family Account. My breath caught. Page after page, I found invoices, appliances, furniture, even art pieces, all totaling more than $80,000. I felt dizzy, gripping the edge of the desk. My son had turned my savings into his future, and he hadn't told me a thing. When I heard the sound of his car in the driveway, I shoved the papers back exactly where I'd found them and rushed downstairs. My hands were trembling so badly, I nearly dropped a glass while setting the table. He came in smiling, carrying takeout bags. "Dinner's on me tonight, Mom." It wasn't guilt that made him generous, it was arrogance. He believed I'd never question him. I forced a smile and sat across from him. "How was your day?" "Good. Productive." He bit into his burger, oblivious to the storm inside me. "Got some things in motion for the future." "Your future?" He looked up, chewing. Our future, obviously. You're not planning to live forever, are you? The casual cruelty of his tone chilled me. I smiled faintly, nodding. Of course, but inside, a small voice whispered, "He's planning your absence." That night, I couldn't stop pacing. I pulled open the drawer of my bedside table and took out my old notebook, the one I used to keep lesson plans in. I turned to a blank page and wrote, September 9th. He's using my money. I signed over everything, and now he's building a life without me. The words looked strange in my handwriting, too neat for the chaos they contained. For the next week, I wrote every day. Dates, small details, every comment he made that twisted my stomach. Each page felt like a breath of defiance. He didn't notice my growing distance, too wrapped in his illusion of control. He spent more time out now, coming home late, smelling of expensive cologne. Once, I caught a glimpse of his phone screen, a message from someone saved as Rachel. "Can't wait till the place is done. You'll finally have your own space." I turned away before he saw me watching. By the end of the month, I'd lost 12 pounds. My clothes hung loose, my cheeks hollowed. Miriam texted every few days, but I never answered. Nathan had started screening my calls. "You need rest, Mom. Too much talking stresses you out," he'd say, taking the phone from my hands. But he forgot one thing. I was still a teacher at heart. And teachers notice patterns. I began hiding things, copies of receipts, photos of the invoices, anything I could collect without drawing suspicion. I kept them tucked inside my old lesson plan binder, under the bed. Each night, before sleeping, I read them like scripture. They were my truth, my evidence, my way out. One evening, Nathan announced he'd be gone for the night. "Work thing," he said, grabbing his jacket. "Work?" I asked. He smirked. "Don't look so surprised." As soon as I heard his car pull away, I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, heart racing. The walls felt alive, pulsing with fear and something new determination. I whispered into the empty house, "You're not taking everything from me." The cicadas outside were silent that night, as if listening. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the house steeped in that pale gray quiet that comes just before sunrise. I moved slowly, careful not to make the floorboards creak. Nathan was still asleep upstairs. I could hear his faint snoring through the vents. My heart raced as I pulled open the desk drawer and took out my notebook, the one now fat with evidence. I spread everything across the table: receipts, invoices, a screenshot of his bank transfer, even a note he'd written to himself. "Call the contractor, payment due Friday." My trembling hands smoothed each page flat. The numbers didn't lie. In less than 3 months, Nathan had burned through nearly $90,000 of my savings. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the wreckage of my own naivete. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I dialed Miriam's number. She answered on the second ring. "Helen? Oh my God, are you all right?" My throat tightened. "I need to see you." "Now?" "Yes, please. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When she arrived, she looked at me for a long, heavy moment before speaking. "You look like you haven't slept in a year." "I haven't," I whispered. "Not really." I showed her the papers. She read them in silence, her expression hardening with every line. When she finally looked up, her voice was steady, sharp. "This isn't just manipulation, Helen. This is theft." "But I signed the papers," I said. "The bank made it legal. That doesn't make it right. I can't fight him, Miriam. He's my son." She reached across the table and took my hand, her grip firm. "Then I will help you. But you have to promise me something, no more fear." Her words landed like a slap and a prayer all at once. She called a lawyer she trusted, Richard Bennett, and arranged an appointment for that afternoon. I wanted to back out, to say I was too tired. But Miriam wouldn't let me. "You're coming," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "This ends today." Richard's office was small but immaculate walls, lined with law books, a faint smell of coffee and lemon polish in the air. He greeted me with kind eyes, not pitying, just patient. "Tell me everything," he said. I did. From the bank signing, to the allowance, to the empty fridge and the condo. My voice broke twice, but he didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and said quietly, "Mrs. Moore, what your son has done is called financial exploitation, and it's illegal." "Illegal?" He nodded. "Power of attorney does not give him the right to use your money for personal gain. It gives him authority to manage your affairs in your best interest, which he hasn't done. Miriam squeezed my hand. See? You're not crazy. Richard continued. The first step is revoking the authorization. I'll file the paperwork today. After that, we'll file a criminal complaint. Do you still have access to your account statements? Yes. Copies. Good. Keep them safe. From now on, don't confront him directly until we secure your finances. Understand? I nodded, feeling both terrified and strangely weightless, as though some heavy chain had loosened. When we left the office, Miriam drove in silence until we reached the corner near my street. Then she turned to me. You know this might blow up, right? He won't take it quietly. I know. And you're ready for that? I stared out the window. The house stood there at the end of the block, dark and ordinary. I have to be. That night, I pretended everything was normal. Nathan was on the couch eating fried chicken from a paper box, watching some reality show that made the walls vibrate with laughter tracks. How was your day? He asked between bites. Quiet, I said, keeping my face blank. He nodded, uninterested. Good. I've been thinking maybe we should move soon. The house is old, Mom. Hard to maintain. I found a place downtown, 2 bedrooms, nice view. The way he said we sent a chill down my spine. I smiled faintly. That sounds lovely. He grinned, mistaking obedience for agreement. I'll handle everything. You just rest. I took my tea and went upstairs, closing the door softly behind me. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and cried, not the helpless kind, but something raw and clean, like rain finally breaking a drought. Because now I had something I hadn't had in a long time. A plan. The next morning, when Nathan left for errands, I put on a pressed blouse and combed my hair, small rituals that felt like reclaiming a self I'd buried. I walked to the bank on trembling legs, clutching the folder Richard had prepared. The same young manager who'd smiled so politely before looked up in surprise. Mrs. Moore, how are you? I need to revoke my son's power of attorney, I said. My voice didn't shake. He hesitated. Of course. May I ask why? Because he's been using my money for himself. He nodded solemnly and typed for several minutes. I'll need your signature here and here. Once this is processed, your son will no longer have access to your account. I signed. The pen glided smoothly, like a blade across silk. Would you like to set up a new account, separate from the existing one? Yes, I said. A private one. By the time I walked out into the sunlight, I was shaking not from fear, but from adrenaline. The world felt wider, the air sharper. For the first time in months, I could breathe deeply. The fox inside me had awakened, and it was hungry. When I got home from the bank, I didn't go straight inside. I stood by the porch railing for a long moment, feeling the humidity wrap around me like a damp shroud. Every instinct screamed that Nathan would sense something was different, that he'd smell my rebellion before I even crossed the threshold. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. I stepped in, leaving my shoes by the door. The air felt heavy, as though it had been waiting. On the kitchen counter sat a half-empty beer bottle and a crumpled receipt from a hardware store. Rose Street Development was printed neatly across the top. Proof, right in the open. I slipped it into my pocket before heading upstairs. The hallway smelled of his cologne, sharp, synthetic, intrusive. His door was half closed. For a moment I hesitated, then I pushed it open. His room was a landscape of chaos. Laundry piles, empty takeout boxes, a glowing computer screen filled with open tabs. But what caught my eye was a thick folder labeled Purchase Agreement. I took a deep breath and began snapping pictures with my phone. Invoices, wiring transfers, loan schedules, contractor names. My fingers trembled, but I didn't stop until I'd captured every page. That's when I heard the crunch of tires in the driveway. My heart leapt into my throat. I shoved the folder back, straightened the chair, and dashed out. By the time Nathan walked through the front door, I was calmly folding laundry at the dining table. He looked at me suspiciously. What are you doing in my room earlier? I froze mid-fold. Your room? I wasn't there. His eyes narrowed. I saw the light on. I checked for leaks in the ceiling. The rain last night, remember? A tense silence hung between us before he shrugged. You should have asked me. I've got it under control. Of course you do, I said, forcing a smile. He grunted and went upstairs, the floorboards creaking above my head. Only when his door slammed shut did I allow myself to breathe again. That night, I met Miriam at a quiet cafe 2 blocks away. I slid into the booth, clutching my phone. "I have proof," I whispered. She listened as I showed her the photos, scrolling through each image, her expression darkening. "This is more than enough," she said. "We take it to Richard first thing in the morning." I nodded, my fingers tight around the coffee cup. "He's getting bolder. He's talking about selling the house." Miriam's voice hardened. "He can't. The property deed is solely in your name. Remember what Richard said, you're the owner. He's bluffing. But he doesn't know I revoked the authorization yet," I said. "Then don't tell him," she replied. "Let him dig his own hole a little deeper." For the first time in weeks, I almost smiled. The next day, we went to Richard's office again. He looked over the photos, nodding with grim satisfaction. "These transactions are clear evidence of financial abuse," he said. "He's funneled your money into personal assets. We'll file a complaint immediately." He typed for several minutes, then handed me a printed form. "This is your official statement. Once you sign it, the police can begin an investigation." My pen hovered above the paper. "He'll know it was me." "Yes," Richard said softly, "but you'll be protected. I've already notified the bank and the credit bureau. He can't touch your funds now." I took a slow breath and signed. When the tip of the pen left the page, I felt something shift inside me, the faint click of a lock turning from the inside out. That evening, I returned home before Nathan. I cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken and mashed potatoes, the way I used to when he was 12 and still sweet. The house smelled of rosemary and butter, warm and deceptive. When he arrived, his face softened for the first time in months. "What's this? Some kind of peace offering?" I smiled, handing him a plate. "Something like that." We ate in silence. He talked about contractors, about renovations, about our future. I nodded at all the right moments, my hands steady even as my stomach turned. After dinner, he leaned back, sighing contentedly. "See, Mom? Things work better when you trust me." "I do trust you," I said, "completely." He smiled, satisfied. But deep inside, I was already counting the hours. The papers were filed, the accounts secured. The law was now moving behind him like a slow-building storm. That night, as I sat in bed, I wrote in my notebook again. October 14th. The fox has awakened. He doesn't know yet, but the ground beneath him is already giving way. Tomorrow, I will stop being afraid. I closed the book and turned off the lamp. The moonlight fell through the curtains, pale and silver on the floor. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. The next morning, sunlight crept across the curtains like a cautious visitor. I woke with the faintest sense of peace, fragile, like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Nathan had gone out early. Perfect. I got dressed carefully, not like a woman defeated, but like one preparing for battle. Blue blouse, neat slacks, hair brushed smooth. I packed my notebook, the folder of evidence, and a sandwich wrapped in foil. The little details of independence feeding myself, preparing for the day, felt revolutionary. When I arrived at the police precinct, my hands trembled only slightly as I handed over the report Richard had filed. The officer scanned through it and looked up, his face unreadable but kind. "You're doing the right thing, Mrs. Moore," he said. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. We'll notify you once the investigation begins." Those words, "you're not the first," both comforted and saddened me. How many mothers had been betrayed by the people they brought into the world? By the time I returned home, the afternoon sun had turned golden. Nathan's car was back in the driveway. I took a slow breath, slipped my keys quietly into the lock, and stepped inside. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling his phone, surrounded by half-eaten takeout boxes. "Hey, Mom," he said without looking up. "We need to talk later about next month's payments." I froze. "Payments?" "Yeah, the loan for the new condo. Don't worry, I already transferred the first installment." My heart thudded. "You what?" He smirked. "I used your account. It's easier." "That's impossible," I whispered. He shrugged. "Why?" "I've been handling everything for months." He didn't know the access had been revoked. He didn't know the account he'd just tried to use was already locked. My pulse raced. I wanted to laugh, scream, confess everything all at once, but I forced myself to stay calm. "We'll talk later," I said softly. He nodded, distracted, and went upstairs. That evening, when the house fell into darkness, I turned on the porch light and waited. I had set the stage earlier, every drawer emptied, the refrigerator wiped clean, his favorite beer poured down the drain. On the kitchen table, a single note in my neat handwriting. From now on, whoever doesn't earn doesn't eat. The homeowner. I sat in my rocking chair, the shawl around my shoulders, the cicadas humming beyond the yard. Then came the slam of the front door. "What the hell is this?" Nathan's voice cracked through the night. "Where's the food? Where's everything?" I didn't answer. I rocked gently, eyes on the stars. He stormed onto the porch, face red, fists clenched. "Did you lose your mind? You threw out my groceries?" I looked up at him, calm as still water. "My groceries, bought with my money." "Mum, don't start." "No." I rose slowly, the chair creaking behind me. "You've taken enough. I know about the apartment, the loans, the money you stole. I know everything." For a heartbeat, the night went silent. Then he laughed high and shaky. "You're confused. I didn't steal anything. I was managing it." "Managing?" I repeated. "You burned through nearly $90,000 in 3 months. You lied to my face. You shut me out of my own life. That's not management, Nathan. That's greed." His smile faltered. "You can't prove anything." I held up my phone. "Every receipt, every transfer, every photo of your files. The police have them now." He froze, color draining from his face. You went to the police?" "Yes." He staggered back a step, shaking his head. "You wouldn't do that to your own son." "I would," I said quietly, "because you stopped being my son when you started treating me like your victim." He stared at me, his mouth working for words that wouldn't come. Then anger overtook him. "You ruined everything. You'll regret this." "No, Nathan," I said, voice low but steady. "You will." I handed him a folded paper, an eviction notice prepared by Richard. "You have 48 hours to leave this house. After that, I'll let the police handle it." He snatched it, his hands trembling. "You can't throw me out? I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem anymore." His face twisted disbelief, fury, desperation blending into something almost pitiful. "Mom, please." "I used to beg too," I said softly. "For peace, for respect. You taught me what silence costs. I won't pay it again." He stared at me for a long, hollow moment before dropping the paper onto the porch. "You'll die alone," he spat. "Maybe," I whispered, "but I'll be free." He turned and stormed off into the night, the sound of his car engine fading down the street. I stayed on the porch until dawn, rocking in slow rhythm, the shawl around me warm and heavy. The stars dimmed, replaced by the first streaks of morning light. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel trapped. The fear was gone, replaced by something else quiet, fierce satisfaction. Inside, the house waited. Empty, but mine again. For 2 full days, the house sat in uneasy stillness. Nathan didn't speak to me, didn't even look at me. He moved around like a ghost that hated being seen. Each sound, the slam of a door, the clink of a dish, felt like a threat wrapped in routine. But I didn't cower anymore. I washed my dishes. I made my coffee. I breathed like someone who had reclaimed her right to air. On the 3rd morning, his suitcases appeared in the hallway. They looked strange there, as though they'd shrunk since he brought them in, or maybe it was me who had grown. He was sitting on the couch, head in his hands. "Are you really doing this?" he asked, without looking up. "I am." He lifted his face. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with sleeplessness. "You're my mother." "I was," I said softly. "But mothers aren't meant to be used. They're meant to be loved." He flinched, mouth twitching like he wanted to argue. But the words never came. He rose slowly, picked up the suitcases, and paused at the door. "You'll regret this." "I already regretted staying silent," I answered. The door closed behind him with a final, hollow click. I waited a long time before locking it. Then I walked through the rooms, kitchen, hallway, bedroom, touching the furniture like a blind woman rediscovering her home. The air smelled different already, lighter. I caught my reflection in the hall mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked tired, yes, but her eyes were steady, alive. 3 days later, the phone rang. It was Linda Carver, my late husband's lawyer. "Mrs. Moore," she said. "Thomas left something with me, a letter, sealed, with instructions to deliver it only if Nathan ever attempted to take your property. I think now qualifies." I sat down, my knees suddenly weak. "A letter?" "Yes, would you like to come by?" Her office smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. Linda greeted me with a gentleness that felt almost maternal. She handed me an envelope sealed with red wax. My husband's handwriting slanted across it, shaky but unmistakable. To Helen, only if Nathan becomes the man I feared he might. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The letter was 3 pages long, written in ink that had faded to brown. My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, then my fears came true. I always hoped I was wrong about our son, but something in him frightened me even when he was a boy. The way he could lie without blinking. The way he watched people, not with kindness, but calculation. You loved him more than I could, and maybe that was my failure. I envied your softness, but I also knew one day he might use it against you. That's why I left everything in your name, and why I arranged protection legal aid prepaid for 5 years. I wanted to make sure, even after I'm gone, that you're never alone. Don't blame yourself, Helen. You are not weak. You are good. That's what made you vulnerable. But goodness is not defeat. It's endurance. It's the quiet courage to start again. Be strong, my love. Be free. Thomas. By the time I reached the end, tears blurred the page, not from grief, but from release. I had spent months wondering if I'd failed as a wife, as a mother, as a woman. Now I knew I hadn't failed at all. I had survived. Linda offered a tissue. He loved you very much, you know. I believe that now, I said. And for the first time, I meant it. That evening, I sat on the porch again, the same place where I'd once smiled at Nathan's scream. Only now, the silence felt gentle. The stars seemed closer, the night air clean. I wrapped the shawl tighter around me and whispered, "Thank you, Thomas, for believing I could do this." Somewhere deep inside, I felt him answer not in words, but in the steady rhythm of the wind against the trees. 6 months later, the house on Willow Lane no longer felt haunted. The walls had been painted a warm ivory, the curtains replaced with light cotton that swayed in the morning breeze. In the kitchen, sunlight spilled across the new table I'd bought myself, sturdy, simple, mine. There was laughter again in the rooms, though it didn't come from me alone. It came from Lena Torres, the nursing student who now rented the spare bedroom, the same one that used to hold Nathan's boxes of excuses and dust. She'd moved in 3 months earlier after seeing my small ad on the bulletin board at the community college. Quiet room for rent, kitchen shared, kindness required. The first evening she arrived, she'd stood shyly in the doorway, clutching her worn backpack. "Mrs. Moore, I promise I'm neat and quiet. I just need a place close to the hospital." I'd smiled, then really smiled. "Call me Helen, and you're home." Lena brought warmth with her. She filled the space with music and cinnamon tea, left sticky notes that said things like, "Dinner's on me tonight," and "Don't forget your book club." The house began to hum with life again. One morning, as I watered the geraniums on the porch, I glanced at the mail and froze for just a moment. Among the envelopes was one from the Savannah County Court. Inside was a single sheet of paper, confirmation that Nathan Moore had been ordered to repay $52,000 in restitution. He had sold the condo, the monument to his arrogance, to cover the debt. I traced my finger over the ink, exhaling slowly. Not triumph, not vengeance, just peace. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into a small box beside Thomas's letter, where both would stay proof of endings and of beginnings. Later that week, Miriam picked me up for our Wednesday women's group at the community hall. 12 women, all over 60, gathered around coffee and pie to share stories that the world never asked to hear. When it was my turn, I stood, smoothing my skirt, my heart calm. I spoke about silence, about the cost of patience, about the strange cruelty that can hide inside love. And then, I spoke about freedom. When I finished, there were tears not of pity, but recognition. A woman named Carmen whispered, "My son controls my pension. I didn't think I could stop him." "You can," I told her gently, "before you lose more than money." Afterward, Miriam hugged me and laughed through her tears. "You've turned into a preacher, Helen." "Maybe," I said, smiling, "or maybe I've just remembered how to speak." That evening, when I returned home, a large box sat on the porch. Inside was a sea-green knitted blanket and a card in neat handwriting. "Thank you, Helen, for giving me a home when I had none. You are the mother I wish I'd had." Lena, I pressed the blanket to my chest, the soft yarn still warm from her hands. Tears came easily this time, but they felt light, healing tears. I sat in my rocking chair beneath the same stars that had once witnessed my despair. The cicadas hummed softly. The night breeze carried the scent of jasmine. I looked up and whispered, "Thank you, Thomas. And thank you, Helen, for not giving up. Because true wealth isn't measured in what we own, but in what we refuse to let others take from us: our dignity, our voice, our right to choose peace. Some wounds leave scars, but scars are proof that we healed. I once believed a mother's love should endure anything. Now I know the truth. Love without respect isn't love, it's surrender. And surrender was something I no longer knew how to do. So if you've ever had to stand up for yourself, even against someone you love, tell me your story. Because stories like ours, stories of women who finally said enough, deserve to be heard. And if you want to walk beside me through more of them, stay with me. There are many lights to relight in this world.